Well, guess who's back in town again? Silly Gene Simmons. Billy Gene Simmons is at it again. A couple of days ago, he was on the Bill O'Reilly show, if I'm not mistaken, and he repeated the stupidity that he's been saying for the past decade or two, that the reason that rock is dead and that the music industry is going down is because of the freckled kid next door who's downloading music for free, and that's why I can't have my billions. Rock is dead. Simmons, you're a grown ass man. You're a multi-millionaire and you're still bitching about it. You know whose fault it is? It is your fault. Your fault, because you're involved in the music industry very, very deeply and you have a lot of connections. And you're the one who rode the train, not watched the train ride, but rode the train of fame and fortune and making a huge business out of it. And I'm talking about specifically late 80s through the 90s, when there was an explosion, when making music started to become super, super easy, super within reach. You didn't have to have that sort of die-hard dedication and to give something up. I already spoke about this in the past, right? In the 60s and the 70s, you really had to give something up. You had on one hand the guys who came from very, very working class, poor, let's just say, from poor background. Judas Priest, Budgie, right? The story is that at a certain point they were living in their tour van. That's where they were sleeping. That's where they did everything. They were brushing their teeth in the snow and so on and so forth. At a certain point, I think there was a bill with Budgie on top, then Thin Lizzy, then Judas Priest, and they were touring England and they were staying in the same apartment after each concert. And so it definitely took a good amount of dedication. You had to give something up. From their perspective, it looked like either they going to work a backbreaking shitty job for the rest of their lives and eke out a living just like their parents did, or maybe break through and make it big and become rock stars, or at least make a living doing what they want, what they love. On the other hand, you had people who were more advanced, like David Gilmour, like Robert Fripp, like Ian Anderson, people who had a much brighter future in front of them, educated people. All of these guys, they were in well-known, well-reputable universities, John Lord among them. So there's a fairly good list of people who were not blue-collar, working-class, poor families at all, but they gave up that bright future to make music, to do something they believed in. As time advanced, this stopped. In the mid 80s, it became a circus. Anyone who could play a chord and a half could become a big rock star. They went on, they put the makeup, and they were all competing to make the songs more outrageous, more obscene, to do the music more extreme, right? Thrash metal, death metal, black metal, all of these kinds were born, for better or worse. But the main point is here that the industry just rode the train of fame and of making money, and it became a very, very big, very well organized machine. And they refused to see what's coming. When they switched from records to CDs, they didn't give a crap about us who didn't really like that. I remember that a lot of bands, Jethro Tull for example, they promised that JTull.com, which was released in '99, would come out on record, and then in the last minute they changed their mind. It wouldn't have cost them a fortune. They would have made back their money. And kudos to Iron Maiden who never gave up. They released everything. Brothers in Arms, what is it called? Not Brothers in Arms. I forget, the one that they released in 2000 when Bruce and Adrian came back. But they released all of their releases on vinyl. Brave New World. They released all of their records on vinyl, which is very, very beautiful. And there were a handful of bands who did that, and there were a handful of bands that stuck to their guns, right? Saxon, Motorhead, Uriah Heep, for example. All of these bands just remained steadfast and didn't give in to the fad and fashion of industrial slash grunge slash whatever you want to call it, new metal, death metal, progress. I don't know what names they gave them. But the case in point is that Gene refuses to recognize any of this. The only problem is the freckled little kid next door downloading music for free. Well, tell you what, Gene Simmons, that freckled kid next door who's downloading music, he's downloading 5, 10, maybe 20 times more music that I was able to afford as a kid in the record store. And they were secondhand records anyway. So for the most part, the actual artist didn't really make that much money on me. I would say that a good 60, maybe 70% of all of my records were secondhand all the time. Even when I was kind of forced to start buying CDs for everyday listening and to listen in the car, even so, I would always prefer buying secondhand, right? So Simmons is absolutely wrong about this. And I'm sorry, I forgot to finish that thought. So the freckled kid next door, whom Gene Simmons is so angry about, is downloading 10, 20 times more music than I had access to as a teenager. And of that 10, 20 times more, he will eventually catch on something, on some percent, maybe 10%, maybe 5%, maybe 20%, but he will love some bands and he's going to buy their music. So those people are going to make music. He's going to go to watch some concerts which are outrageously priced. And so the poor, downtrodden, miserable bands who can't eke out a living, well, you know what? Some bands are actually responding to this in different ways. They are finding jobs and businesses within the music industry, like let's just say Steve Vai and a bunch of modern bands. They are participating in more than one band. This is also becoming very, very common. Some bands have, or some musicians are members in different bands that have completely different musical styles and musical directions, right? Because we went from releasing an album once a year, let's just say, from the early 70s to the late 80s, let's just say, late 60s to early 90s. It was common to release one album every year, or maybe skip one once in a while. So in the mid 80s, it became a little bit more accepted to skip a year in between recordings. But now it's like 5, 6, 7, 8 years between records. So you have more than one band. You tour, you compensate for it otherwise. No one said no one owes you to become a big rock star, certainly not on day one. So, and I know I've ranted about this already, so I'm not really saying anything truly new here, but what boggles the mind is that Gene refuses to budge half an inch. What an idiot. It's not the fault of the freckled kid next door. It's the fault of the industry. It's the fault of the industry that they rode the train of fortune and the technological advancement when it benefited them. They didn't see it coming that this could backfire, but they started much before. I said that the grunge bands of the early 90s, they were the first freckled kids not downloading but producing music for free or quasi for free, for very, very cheap, right? They had the guy from Nirvana, what his name, Cobain, something like that, Kurt Cobain, right? He had the reputation of he was sleeping under the bridge and he was a homeless, which was all BS. He came from a well-to-do family. He had everything he needed in his life. He just went out camping under the bridge to, I don't know what, to feel with the homeless people, or to be nice to them, or to just kind of experience that. The same thing, the famous singer from Blood, Sweat and Tears did the same thing. David Clanton, something like that. He's sort of promoting himself as having slept on the streets, blah blah blah. He came from a well-to-do family. He got music classes when he was a little kid, and he was always a well-to-do person. He simply went out of sympathy or out of raising awareness, so he slept in a sleeping bag for a couple nights in the street. So I'm not necessarily saying that this is bad or this is fake, but what is fake is promoting yourself on the basis of that. Oh, I came from a homeless background. No, you didn't. You came from a well-to-do family, and all of these guys, what's his name, David Grohl and Eddie Vedder and the Smashing Alice and Jane's Pumpkins and all of these silly bands came from this background. So back then, Gene Simmons was not complaining. Back then, Gene Simmons was not complaining that these guys didn't really pay their dues, so to speak. They didn't have to pay these dingy little clubs with 5, 10 people. They never had to really struggle for their music. That didn't bother him. What bothers him is the freckled kids who has access to free music and downloading. First of all, these downloading services are dead. Today, everything is Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and you name it. So, first of all, they are paid services, or they could be paid services. Yeah, they have a free aspect to them, but when you like a band very much, you're going to pay for it. So again, I think that Gene Simmons should come to the realization and admit it, that he's part of the problem and not part of the solution, that he's part of the guilt of the general music industry who didn't get on with the times to protect themselves. They could have done a lot of things. They could have developed software to prevent these free downloads. They could have actually, these things really exist, they're just not so widespread. They could have done something that corrupts the file if you download it illegally without having a key, or I forgot, there is a digital name for something, pretty much like cryptocurrency, right? Same idea, to do blockchain. Now it's already counterproductive, it's not worth it because the excess is so widespread. But had they thought about it in the mid 90s, then they would have prevented it. And I think he's also very, very disingenuous when he says that rock is dead. It might well be that rock is dead in the sense that it will not be again like it was in the late 60s, during the 70s, 80s, that you have like these huge, unbelievable, phenomenal bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and The Who and the Grateful Dead, with this kind of following, and there was a cultural thing. Of course, things changed. We're not living in the same world. And very often, things of that nature, even though they are not actual living organisms, but they have a beginning, they have a high point, and they have a low point. Think about classical music, think about jazz, think about classical painting. All of these things, they started somewhere, they reached a pinnacle, and they went down. And this is very natural. It's not the fault of rap, it's not the fault of synth pop, it's not the fault of this politician or that politician. It's just a normal thing that even cultural or artistic or societal phenomena do have a life cycle. They start, they begin, they reach a high point, and then they fade away. Rock, I don't think will ever go again. Will it change? I'm sure it will. Will it improve? I'm sure it will. Will it disimprove? Will it be worse? Of course it is. But now, for example, there is a revival of 80s style. In my time, they didn't call it hair metal, but that's, I think, the closest definition. Hair metal, mostly female bands. I forgot the names. There is Cobra something, so they come and they perform in bikinis or very little dresses, and they play pretty much the same music that was popular in the mid 80s, late 80s. Again, is it the same thing? No. Does it have the same explosive hundreds, millions of people coming to the concerts and buying the records? No. But you can see that people still prefer making this music than getting a job in the office and having to get dressed and wake up in the morning and go to the office. So they're not dying of hunger. I don't feel bad for any one of these people. Even though they don't become multimillionaires on the first day on the job, it doesn't really matter. Is the music amazing, incredible? No. The technical quality of the music went up, and the less obvious, the less easily expressed, the more thin, a more spiritual aspect of the music, let's just say, what you would call the immediateness or the honesty or the rawness or the honesty of the music, the truthfulness, all of these things that are a little bit difficult to define. It's more like of a feeling or an impression. That is gone for the most part. Not completely, but there are good bands. There is Night Demon, I heard, not bad at all. So there is kind of a revival of the metal of the 70s and the 80s. So no one can really predict the future. In my opinion, there will be artists who will play a similar kind of music, a similar style of music, and make it good. And maybe it's not going to be that big and that explosive, but it will have a smaller crowd of listening and people who are interested. There are still people interested in traditional jazz, right? I hate that style. I can't stand Satchmo and Coltrane and Django Reinhardt and Dizzy Gillespie. I can't stand it. It's boring jazz to me. One word, boring jazz. But then what came out of it, the bebop and the fusion, that's amazing. Chick Corea and Weather Report and Pet Metheny and everything that Miles did, starting in the very early '70s, maybe late '60s, what he did with John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu and all of that stuff. I love it. I'm crazy about it. Weather Report and SMV, all of these guys. Frank Gambale, what he did with the Mike Varney project. I mean, just mind-boggling stuff, right? But there are still people who listen to Buddy Rich and Benny Goodman and Dave Brubeck. All of it's not dead. It's just not as explosive and big as it used to be. Same thing with classical music. There are still people who know. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was kind of a revival of Hummel, who is a protege or a disciple of Haydn, right? So it still exists. It's smaller than it used to be, and it probably will be. But again, it's just life. So for Gene Simmons go out and seething and raging about the freckled kid who downloads music is just plain idiotic. Someone should send him a memo. So Gene, please drink a glass of water. Don't be drunk. Slow it down with your anger and your hatred and your stupidity, and open your eyes. This is a new era, and you're in large part responsible. I don't mean you necessarily personally, although you were complicit in this. You rode the train. You never told any music executive to wake up and to protect digital download or digital music. You never worked in doing any barriers. After the dam burst, no, you're a big genius complaining about it. You were already an established multi-millionaire. You could have worked on safeguarding the music, on preventing it. And again, you could have also worked on making it a serial assembly line kind of business. You could have worked on preventing every idiot, snot-nosed, freckled idiot in the '90s and on from becoming a big somebody, a big rock star with big records. There's I would say 50% of all the guys who got record deals should never have got them, and that's another problem, that the market is so saturated that 8 or 9 out of 10 are crap. Even before the jams and the diamonds were few and far in between, right? That there was always a barrage of all kind of music, and of course there is the aspect that some people prefer one kind of music versus another. One man's great musician is another man's crap musician, but there was a lot of stuff that was abjectly bad or low quality or not great, and so not everyone can be a huge rock star. And some music is amazing, and they're unknown bands. You got Atomic Rooster, you got 12th Night, you got Horselips and Budgie that I just made videos last week. So again, Gene, please sober up, stop the drunken rage, and wake up to the fact that now the boat has sailed. But you could have helped it a lot. Again, I'm not saying you could have completely prevented all of the negative aspects of that. Obviously, that's impossible. But you could have improved it. You could have worked on dampening the supply of bad, low quality music that doesn't belong there, that doesn't belong in the market. And you could have also dampened the easy access to all of that music. So these two things balance themselves out. And like I said, the real freckled kids who get stuff for nothing is the grunge band in the early '90s who has easy access to studios and recording equipment and music equipment, and they started to make cheap music by the millions. So Gene Simmons, again, put down the cold gin, and maybe in 100,000 years you're gonna come around and admit that you were wrong and it's not the fault of the freckled kid. Take care, and until the next video, rock on.